What happened to your eyes?
Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
What are you talking about?
I created the event horizon to reach the stars. But she's gone much, much farther than that.
Well, first off, I'd like to welcome you to my home, Evan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, it's cool. It's been a while since I've done an actual in-person podcast episode with anyone. I mean, Ralph and I did one when I was in Germany, and that was awesome. You know, everything else for the last couple of years, surely, has been remote, you know, via like Skype or Zoom or mobile or whatever. So it's cool to have you up here, man.
Hell yeah. I think it's been over 10 years since I've done something like this too. It did some like college radio back in the day, but yeah, it's a completely different dynamic, but it's cool though, you know?
Yeah.
I dig it.
So we actually spent the weekend up here in lovely New Jersey. We had an excursion out to Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan and the Bronx, actually.
Yeah, I got like the full like
and Staten Island. Like we drove across all 5 boroughs.
Yeah, it was awesome, man.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I was really digging that too. I mean, like I told you, I'd only been to New York twice prior to this, so like, you know, and this was like the best way to do it with, you know, somebody who actually knows the lay of the land and like get to meet your friends who were all of them super cool, super awesome. So yeah, I had a really rad time.
And you got to also meet the one and only Mr. Mike Scandato.
That's right, I did, yeah.
And his lovely lady, Stella.
Yeah, nice people.
Yeah, actually, that was a lot of fun yesterday at the Krampus Market, you know, at the Flying Fox. You know, shout out to the Flying Fox in Ridgewood, Queens. And, yeah, it was a good time, man. I love doing stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah. Really cool vibe, and, like, all the vendors that were there were super chill and had really good stuff. And, like, yeah, I definitely want to do something like that again.
Yeah, there's I'm gonna say she's a promoter. It's called Heavy Horror, and you guys should follow her on Instagram. And she's an organizer of all these different, you know, vendor events. And yeah, they got a cool. It's every few years like something like that pops up where there'll be like a promoter who puts on these cool events where people get to, you know, sell their, you know, vend their crafts. You know, you can buy records. You know, people make their, you know, clothing. I dropped quite a bit of cash yesterday. I got a bunch of records. I got a handmade silk pillow.
Yeah, super nice too.
Yeah, and one of Stella's like handmade shirts. And I got to say that pillow, I think it really pulls the room together.
Sure does. Also, shout out to the Flying Fox. That bar was like super cool. I asked one of the vendors, like, you know, if they were taking anything from them to be there, and they said no. Like that place was letting all them like just sell their stuff for free, and like the staff there was super nice, and like, yeah, a really cool vibe in that place too. So if any of you guys are in that area, definitely go check out the Flying Fox.
That's one of the cool things about New York. Every now and then, it's like, you know, you and I would talk because I lived in New York for decades until I moved out here to New Jersey. And, you know, I consider, even though I live out here in Jersey and I love the state of New Jersey, I consider myself a New Yorker because I was born in New York, not in the city, but in the state, and spent most of my life living there. But one of my biggest criticisms of New York City is how everyone has their hand in your pocket. And, like, every move you make, you drop in, like, you know, $10 here, $20 here, $50 here. You know, another $5 here. You got to tip this guy, and next thing you know, you're like $200 in the hole just from going around the block. You know what I mean?
Right. You haven't even done anything yet.
You haven't even done anything yet, and it's like it's really nice to see that there's people that are actually just motivated by doing cool stuff instead of making cash, a quick buck off of people. You know.
Sure. I mean, and you know, I got the vibe there that like they understood that. You know, if the vendors do well, then the bar does well.
Yeah.
You know, so like everyone's making money. You know, and one hand washes the other kind of thing. You know.
And also, just like the vibe of that place too is pretty awesome. It's very much horror centric. You know, there's like all these like prints of Vampira. This gigantic Hellraiser poster in the men's room, or one of the bathrooms or whatever. And you know, there's a huge coffin above the bar.
Some prosthetic legs.
There's like monitors playing like the old episodes of the Munsters, and you know.
Yeah, it's like totally up my alley. I loved it. Like, yeah, it's great.
And unlike some other spots in New York City that I've been to that kind of cater to like horror, this is like a very punk metal aesthetic. Like the people that were hanging out were all like dudes that were like, you know, part of like the culture that you and I are part of. And the DJ was playing, they were killing it with the music.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And it was just like an overall great way to spend the afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really cool time. And like I said, I really like that place. So, you know, shout out to those guys.
So today's episode of Hollywood Babylon, this is our second installment of this show that's on the Patreon platform. So, you know, thanks to everyone for supporting the Patreon. And, you know, we've been trying to get content out to you guys on a weekly basis. And this is one of the efforts that we have. And the first pilot episode was on the regular stream, but everything else is going to reside here for you guys, the Legion, the Everything Went Black Legion. So today's entry into this pantheon of stuff, we're going to be talking about Event Horizon.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple of particulars about that movie. Event Horizon came out in the United States August 15th, 1997. In the UK, August 22nd, 1997. Was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson and written by Philip Eisner. Now, Paul Anderson, prior to making this film, had done Mortal Kombat, which I didn't see. Have you seen that?
I have seen it, yeah.
Yeah. I haven't actually seen any of his things, believe it or not. This is like, I saw Alien versus Predator. He was kind of the creative force behind Resident. I've seen Resident Evil and Death Race, and not Death Race. I think that was Jason Statham was in that.
Yeah,
and it was like a sort of a not even really a remake, but like a spiritual successor of the vibe of the David Carradine film Death Race 2000, the Roger Corman production.
Yeah.
Which I'm a big fan of that one.
Absolutely.
Sylvester Stallone's in that too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And you know how you guys all know how I feel about Sly. So yeah, Sly and Arnold are like my guys.
Those are your guys.
Yeah.
I had mentioned to you when we were watching this that he had done that Mortal Kombat, but I joked around that like he probably just did that film to like pay the bills. But upon like doing some research, it turns out he's a huge video game fan.
Yeah.
So like, and we'll touch on this when we start talking about the movie. But there's like, even in this movie, he does some references to the video game Doom, and like obviously he did the Resident Evil series and the Mortal Kombat, and so yeah, turns out he's just a fucking gamer nerd, and like, you know, he really likes to do that kind of stuff.
Well, some of the criticisms that I've read about the movie was that they considered it to be almost like too much of a video game vibe to it, which I don't even see in the film.
No, I don't see that either. No.
You know, people will find any reason to fucking criticize something. You know what I mean? That's a drag, I think. You know.
Haters, man.
Yeah.
Surrounded by haters.
Now, before we start talking about the film, this is you know, it's an older movie. It came out in '97. What was your introduction to this movie? Like, when did you first see this? You know,
I remember it really vividly. We used to have this video rental place in my hometown called Video World, and it's, you know, your typical like Blockbuster or whatever kind of spot. And I was just making my way through the sci-fi section because I realized that like in my like teenage years that was like a genre that I was really, really into. So I just was going down, and I asked the guy behind the counter. It's like, hey, this is like, I'm into this Alien and like this kind of stuff. Like, what do you recommend? He's like, check out Event Horizon if you haven't seen that. And so rented that and was like blown away. And since then I've probably seen that maybe 20 times.
Now I'm going to say that Event Horizon is probably equaled only by Alien as far as like the combo of sci-fi and horror.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I saw a description of this movie, and I think it fits it perfectly. It's Alien meets The Shining.
And also, I might add, and you and I think might agree on this, that it's like Alien crossed with The Shining, crossed with Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, it's when someone's pride in something just like blocks all their like good judgment, and they, you know, just can't see the writing on the wall. Absolutely. Definitely agree with that analogy.
So like my introduction to this film was back in the 90s when I was living in Boston. You know, it was in a more freewheeling era of my life. I was living in this house on Mission Hill with a bunch of degenerates, like hooligan types. And now we had this apartment on Calumet Street, and you know, I was never really sure who actually lived there. You know, who was on the lease.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like I know I lived there for a period of time.
I've had a few houses like that.
When I first moved in, I was living on the couch. There was like a attic room that Slapshot had practice at.
Oh, right on.
Because the guys in 10 Yard Fight lived there, and there's a maybe a year period where basically 10 Yard Fight was Slapshot in Boston.
Okay.
So they would rehearse in the attic.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I can't even imagine what that sounded like outside. But,
Yeah, I'm sure it was
but
awful.
the neighborhood,
They probably hated it.
the neighborhood was pretty buck wild back then, as
that's
far as
cool.
like
That's cool.
you know, kind of like a the Wild West. You know, for any old like Boston types. I mean, Mission Hill now is totally different, but back then it was a little bit of like the Wild West, like frontier land. So, you know, kind of a more dangerous, like sketchier area.
Sounds like a good time.
Yeah. So like that was you know, for the freewheeling '90s, and like I said, I don't really I never really knew who was actually on the lease, who lived there. We had guys coming in and out. One room would be vacated, another guy would move in. There'd always be dudes on the couch, like pit bulls, like hanging out, like you know,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like real like parties, dudes that get thrown off the railing, you know,
Yeah, right.
blood on
Yeah.
the sidewalk, like that kind of stuff.
Broken walls, broken doors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know who rented this movie, but one day this film showed up from Blockbuster on VHS in the living room, and it was Event Horizon, and this is the back when there wasn't really, the internet was around, but it wasn't like it is now, where you didn't have it with you 24/7. You had to like go to your AOL account or whatever, and your dial-up modem and get online.
Wait
So-
10 minutes to download something. Yeah.
So like information wasn't disseminated the same way. Like you didn't just know about movies. So Event Horizon, because I was always a big fan of horror, like I read about it in like, you know, like maybe Fangoria or something like that.
Right.
And I was aware of it. And then when this VHS tape showed up, I was like, oh, I want to see this movie. So we watched it one night, and I was totally blown away because the 90s were kind of like a low point for horror in general. You know what I mean? I feel like, you know, there was like the ironic horror, like Scream, you know, and Scary Movie was like big, and there really, in the States at least, there wasn't a lot of like legit, like serious toned horror. You know, there's tons of stuff coming in from Italy and Europe and whatnot, Japan. But as far as like serious, you know, U.S. based stuff, there really wasn't a lot of that. Now that VHS tape never got returned.
Of course not.
It just like, I don't know who rented it. It wasn't me. And like, you know, back then it was, you couldn't track anyone down. So
Nah.
that just ended up, for all I know, it's still in that apartment. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's just something I would revisit that. and
It's
just,
built into the foundation of the.
yeah, I would just like trip out in this movie all the time and watch it, like show it to people. But, oh, you see Event Horizon. So that, and as a result of that, it just became one of my all-time favorite, I would say, horror movies, really. Even though it is a science fiction film, to me, it has more in common with like cosmic horror than it does with like hard science fiction, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's like, yeah, there's spaceships, there's interstellar travel, you know, there's like, but there's this sort of occult element to it of going into other dimensions that may be perceived as hell, you know, science verging on magic, you know,
Absolutely.
and just like unknown terrors beyond the confines of our mundane reality, you know. So in a lot of ways, this is almost like a Lovecraftian story, you know, crossed with like, you know, Moby Dick. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You know, at the time, I mean, you know, I'm sure somebody will correct me, but as far as I knew, up until that point, there wasn't really too many movies or any movie that I was aware of that combined like the concept of hell with the exploration of space. And I think that's just a really unique idea, and it's something that makes, for me, is one of the reasons why this movie is so cool, because, you know, it raises a lot of questions in your head, and they never really get answered, which is even better. So, yeah, I absolutely adore like the concept of this film. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, man. Like you know, one of the things that I always like muse on is like, the science versus magic, science and the occult, and the confines of our own understanding of the reality that we live in, looking at a broader spectrum of reality which exists beyond what we can perceive, and that's like kind of the building blocks of like, cosmic horror, explored by Lovecraft. And,
Sure. And on some level, it seems believable. Like, I remember when people were like super worried about that particle collider that they built, that they were going to create a black hole that was going to destroy, the fucking Earth or something, right? But I mean, there is, and it could just be because we've watched too many science fiction films, but there's, somebody accidentally invented like the nuclear bomb, right? So we could definitely stumble across some dimension or some crazy like invention that would border more on the side of like the cosmic or like the monstrous, just by accident. So
by accident, yeah,
right.
So let's just do like a quick rundown of like what this movie's about for any of you guys out there who haven't seen it. Now, just to let you know, a few years ago, me and Mike covered this on Necromaniacs, and if you want to check out that episode, you can go back into the log of Necromaniacs. But I feel like this the approach that we have on Hollywood Babylon is a little bit different. So, it's a bit of a revisitation of this film, but this time around it's me and Evan talking about it. So we're going to get some different perspectives. So the Event Horizon is a spacecraft with an experimental drive designed by Dr. Weir. Okay, and we'll get into who plays who soon. And the craft disappeared on its maiden voyage to Proxima Centauri 7 years prior to the events chronicled in this film. The ship reappears at the edge of our solar system around Neptune, and the Lewis and Clark, which is a more of like a utility rescue ship, is sent out there to investigate what's going on. And there's a transmission that they receive, a distress signal, that is basically just noise, screams, and a phrase that is at first perceived to be the Latin phrase "liberate me," which means "save me." Okay, but we learned there's a little bit different things going on later on. Now, Dr. Weir accompanies them because this is his invention, and he would have more of a deeper understanding about the mechanics of the ship and all that kind of stuff. Now, it turns out that this experimental drive, there's a neat scene where he asks the crew, like, what's the shortest point between 2 points? And, and the ship engineer was like, since engineers like to solve problems, he's like, straight line. And he's like, that's incorrect. We fold space so that we minimize the distance between these 2 points, and you step in through this black hole and just reappear on this other side of the universe. And that's what his experimental drive is. It creates an artificial black hole in the core of this Event Horizon ship, and it transports it from point A to point B thousands of light years across the universe. And that's the basic setting of this film.
And a little side note, something that I just thought was interesting was the movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey actually almost like word for word uses this exact scene to describe a very similar thing in that film as well. So obviously they were showing a little bit of homage to Event Horizon, which is cool.
Now the cast, excuse me, the cast is filled with a bunch of really cool actors. Okay, we got Lawrence Fishburne as Captain Miller. He's the commander of Lewis and Clark. The legendary Sam Neill.
Yeah, I mean, come on, who's cooler than him?
The peerless Sam Neill as Dr. Weir, and he's the designer of the Event Horizon and its experimental drive. We have Kathleen Quinlan as Peters, the medical technician. Jolie Richardson, who you guys might have seen in Color Out of Space. She plays Lieutenant Stark. Richard T. Jones as Cooper. He's the rescue tech. And also typical in a lot of these 90s films, kind of the comic relief, too.
Yeah.
But, he's a cool character, though. I kind of appreciate it. Like, he had some good lines in the movie.
He absolutely did, yeah.
Jack Noseworthy as Ensign Justin, the chief engineer of Lewis and Clark, baby-faced guy.
Yeah, right.
Jason Isaacs as DJ, the medical doctor, who's also kind of like has this cold, like his character is weird because he has almost this like he seems like a serial killer or something like that.
He's also that blonde fucker's dad in Harry Potter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he has this like weird like detachment, like this sketchy like vibe about him, which
Absolutely.
is like, kind of uncomfortable, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have Sean Pertwee, like a British heartthrob, cool hat in this movie.
Yeah.
And he's Smith. He's a pilot. He's like this kind of rough and tumble, gruff British guy. You know what I mean?
And he's made a lot of appearances in this sort of film. He's always got a similar role like this.
Like no nonsense.
Yeah, yeah, and just kind of like like he's from the streets or something like that.
Yeah, he's like working class,
working
like
class,
Londoner or
right,
something,
right.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah, very, very gruff exterior kind of guy.
Utilitarian,
yeah. So that's essentially all the main characters in the film, and it creates this like claustrophobic sort of vibe because everyone's stuck on this ship, and they traverse out to check out the event horizon, and then they're on that setting. Now, what in this film is scary to you?
Well, number one, I think always space is just a perfect setting for horror because you can't go anywhere. You're trapped on this ship. And whether it's you're dealing with this black hole drive or you're dealing with some alien creature, space is just always something that kind of gives me a little bit of like anxiety, just because if you start to think about the vastness of space and being lost in space, it's just that kind of like builds a little bit of tension in me, just that alone. And then I remember when I first saw this movie, a lot of the hallucinations that people were seeing were pretty terrifying. Sam Neill's wife pops up a couple times, and she's like eyeless, and I remember that just being a bit shocking. And but yeah, I would say currently, like after this rewatch, the thing that still sits with me is just that isolation and the knowledge that like you're stuck in space and there's no way to get out.
Yeah, same over here, man. Like the idea, like when you're on planet Earth, everything is more or less known, and I think. You get in your car, you drive down the street, you go to the grocery store, you perceive people, like your scope of reality is very, very much finite, and you have all the, there's not very many variables, and I think that's why deep sea stuff scares me too.
Oh, I get the same, the same.
But when you're stepping into a world where you don't really know the rules, and in space, there's a concept of infinity, which always is you can become insane thinking about the infinite, and you're in a completely different environment, a hostile environment, the vacuum of space, obviously, and that
right.
weighs heavily on some of the characters in this film. And also the idea that you are probably not in full understanding of the forces around you, which this movie kind of addresses really. Mm-hmm. The idea that even the ideas of religion and hell and demons and all that sort of stuff is our projection based on our own intellect of forces in the universe that might be greater than that might actually be quote unquote natural, but it's beyond our understanding. And that's what, to me, is scary about this movie.
Yeah. Also, like, in space, and, you can go insane thinking about this stuff, like you said, but like in space, there's no up, there's no down, there's no left, there's no right. There's just everything. And everything's moving in all directions at the same time. And you are more or less just like a microbe in relation to everything else that's in outer space, and then you add on top of that not only is this is there this vastness in outer space, but then this movie also proposes that there's other dimensions as well. So there's just layer on layer of just how insignificant we are, and if you start dwelling on that for a little while, like that's gonna start like maybe giving you a panic attack. So maybe don't do that.
Yeah, quick aside, I recently heard an interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's like one of my favorite people to listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's pretty much an understood fact, quote unquote, in astrophysics that there is a multiverse.
Yeah, for sure.
That there is like infinite dimensions out there, and there's always, that people always bring this up, that there's you and I exist in other dimensions infinitely, living our exact lives.
Right.
And there's also every iteration of our existence infinitely. And then there's realities where you and I don't even exist.
I want to find the one where I'm like a millionaire, kill him, and then take over.
That's what I was thinking too, man. Maybe I gotta find the dimension where I'm actually successful and like fucking,
right.
Killing it on every level.
Right.
And I'll go there.
There has to be one, right?
Yeah, it has to be an infinite number of those.
Right.
Yeah. So that's that's kind of what this movie, to me at least, like, deals with, and also the captain, the Dr. Weir character. He's kind of like the Ahab, in Moby Dick.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife committed suicide, so he's haunted by that. He has these recurring visions of her, in hell, basically, and then reliving the moments of her suicide and his powerlessness to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's like a haunted guy, and that's why he's agreed to go out on this mission and all that, and right there, that's like, to me, that conflicted character is always like very attractive to me in these kind of stories,
right? And also in real world context, I was doing a little research this morning and found out that the writer of this film actually dealt with something. It was not disclosed what it was, but he said a very personal incident happened in his life, and he sort of wrote this film as a cathartic dump. So I can only imagine some of these, like either Sam Neill's wife or the one woman's son. It's very like prominent in the film, and I imagine something similar. Probably this poor guy probably went through something similar and used this movie as a chance to sort of get some of this stuff off his chest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big vibe of grief and loss in this film, because well, I guess let's get into that now.
Sure.
Is so Miller, Captain Miller, played by Lawrence Fishburne, he also has a loss too, where there was like an incident that happened in his past where a crew member had to be left behind.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right, so that's a recurring theme for him. Like, he has these visions of this guy being burned alive, and and his feeling of responsibility for that. Weir has his wife, and what's her name?
Kathleen
Peters. Her grief is she has a son, and like he's got problems with his legs, and he's handicapped, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
For lack of a better term, and a failed marriage.
Right.
So there's these three elements of loss, death, failed relationship, feelings of responsibility. And Peters, she goes on these deep space missions all the time, so yes, she has to leave her family.
Right.
So that these themes kind of like really play heavily into the story, and we touched on Captain Ahab, and like in Moby Dick, Captain Ahab has this singular mission to kill the whale,
right?
That's like at the expense of everything,
right?
All right, so that's kind of like we're focusing on the event horizon and dragging this crew basically into hell with just this singular vision of what to do. And that's kind of, to me, like, back in the 90s when I saw this, I don't think that really jumped out at me, but like more recently in rewatching this movie, and I think you and I had talked about it.
Did, yeah.
We both agreed that it was like, oh yeah, this is kind of like a vibe on, like a riff on the Moby Dick story too.
Right, because I mean, it's very early on in the film when these strange hallucinations start to happen, and of course, even Sam Neill's character, Dr. Weir also has one of these hallucinations, and they all kind of come back together in like the command center of the spaceship, and everyone's sharing stories except for him. He keeps it to himself, even though he's sharing the same thing. He either doesn't want to believe it, or just he's so hyper focused on his creation, his invention, and how and that God complex of like creating something that it cannot be flawed because I made this, that he's like unable to like be reasonable and rational in this situation.
Yeah, Weir is a very interesting character, very complex. You know what I mean? Because like he's like one of the characters that I always like relate to is like the kind of person who has like good intentions, you know, but is like completely has had some devastating thing happen to them that skews his judgment, and he creates chaos. You
Right.
know? Yeah, and that's always an interesting character to have in a story.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So our crew, they come upon the Event Horizon, and they board the ship, and they find like basically what looks like the site of like carnage, and you know, weightlessness, and there's no gravity on the ship, and you know, there's just a mystery as to what happened. There's no signs of life or anything like that, and that's when Justin goes down into the engine room, you know, because he's the engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to go down, check out the drive. And there's this like black pool, this like Thomas Legatian mass of blackness
Right.
that he just is compelled to reach into, and it pulls him through. And that's when he gets rescued. And this is when we start getting an insight into what actually might have happened. So he gets recovered, and he's in like basically in a coma, and he gives a warning about what's coming, and he says they're coming like the dark,
Right.
you know. So now we're on the edge of reality. We're on the sort of passage, the portal between like two worlds essentially, with the Event Horizon.
And one thing I wanted to comment on, which I found comical in this movie, was you know, they arrive on the ship, and you know, at first they don't see much. They see like a little spot of blood like on the corner of some like command center or you know, control panel. And the power is kind of unstable at this point, so there's like flickering lights, and you, the viewer, like get like little glimpses of something in the background, but you're not really, I mean, you can't really see what it is quite yet until they get the power stabilized, and then all the lights come on, and like on the walls are just all this carry-on and bones and skulls, and they never clean it off.
Nope.
They just fucking leave it the whole time they're in that ship. They're just hanging out with all these bones, and like it's no big deal. Like, they're shocked at first, but then afterwards it's like, whatever. It's just a bunch of bones and carry on.
So now that we're on the Event Horizon, there's two completely different vibes going on. There's like the Lewis and Clark, which looks like a spaceship. You know, it's like you know, your typical spacecraft, what you think of as a spacecraft. But the Event Horizon, it's almost like you know, like H.R. Geiger designed like a spaceship.
Right, right.
So now I learned that apparently the design of the Event Horizon was modeled after the Notre Dame Cathedral.
Oh, right on.
Yeah,
I can totally see that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like they had actually did. I mean, this is like, you know, I'm not gonna stand behind this 100%, but apparently, in some of the places I've read that they had like a scan of like a 3D scan of the event of the Notre Dame Cathedral.
Yeah,
and they used elements of that to model the Event Horizon.
Oh, that's really cool. And I mean, also, I mean, just what kind of implication that has as well. Like, you, the designer, know that you're making a spaceship that's going to hell look like the cathedral. Like, I think that's pretty interesting. Like, that's a smart choice, you know?
Yeah, so there's like
tongue in cheek.
So you go, it's super dark on there, you know, it's like real gothic looking. There's like these columns, like the corridors are like, I don't know, it's just like an interesting choice. They basically made it into like some kind of haunted house or something, you know, like some gothic like castle or something.
Right.
You know.
And like the since we're on like the topic of architecture, the there's a long hallway that leads down to where the event horizon is, and I think both of us agree that that's sort of like the Dante Inferno like moment in the film, like or part of the ship where you're actually you're going from like the earthly realm and crossing over into hell, and at the center of it is the actual event horizon. And one thing that you brought up that I was just having a laugh about was like there's just all like it's such a dangerous design. Like this this whole room is full of spikes and like there's a an uncovered black pool of who knows what. There's this like floating apparatus, which is the event horizon. That's like all of these huge metal rings that are just spinning around a central sphere, but it's not contained in any way. It's just the whole thing. It's just like obviously Dr. Weir, like safety was not like his top concern when designing this
well, the funny part about it too is like when Weir brings the crew down there, he's like, "Oh no, it's perfectly safe."
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, "Bro, that does not look safe
Not
to me.
at
There's
all.
like spikes everywhere. This thing looks like it could cut me to pieces like at any time,
Yeah, it was like it was that part was really funny to me.
Yeah, so the ship, the thing I like about this film too is that there's no monster, like in Alien, there's obviously, the xenomorph,
right?
Like hunting everyone down,
right?
And once again, this is like a weird fiction story, man. It's like there's this presence that's manipulating people. Everyone is having their similar to The Shining. I guess this is where the Shining comparisons come in.
Yeah.
Where there's manifestations of past events that's haunting everyone.
And it's personal to that person.
And it's dialed into like their psyches, and like, but with The Shining though, it's more of like the location is like capturing all these ghosts, I guess. And that's what people are experiencing. Like say if you and I went to like the Overlook, like we would see what everyone else sees in those rooms. Like, we would experience that. Like it wouldn't be a personalized, torment.
Definitely, yeah.
But yeah, and that's another like Dante-esque aspect of this film too, where it's almost like everyone is going through their own circles of hell. They're atoning in some ways for some of the things that they've perceived as being sins in their lives.
Right. I mean, that's usually like in all kinds of literature and in film as well. Whenever there's a concept of hell, I mean, it's usually you're faced with the thing that you fear the most, and that thing is most of the time it's some sort of like mistake that you've made or some atrocity that you committed while you were alive, and then being tormented with that over and over again till you go insane.
And this is kind of like where the kind of conventional religious aspects of hell and the hypothetical occult version of like scientific, if you will, hell. Because religion, like when you reading some kind of religious text, like they manifest hell as a place, right? But in my estimation, like that is a reflection of like an internal place that you're at, like guilt, and sins are all things that you transgress personally. And when the Christians put together this idea of hell, it's like all these bad things that you've done, and you're like you're serving out a penance or something, or you're dealing with that. And that's kind of like Weir, Miller, and what's her name there?
Peters.
Yeah, they're suffering internally because of all these things that's happened in their lives, and now they're standing on the precipice of what might be considered hell, but it's an actual place that exists in like the continuum of the universe.
I've always had a theory about hell, and I mean, obviously, I don't know if I'm right or wrong. No one does. But if you've ever like experienced something that's like really embarrassing, like you got caught doing something you weren't supposed to do,
jerking off or something like that.
Well, yeah, anything that would make you ashamed. You got caught in a lie, or you got you fucked up. You did something you weren't supposed to. There's always this sensation of like warmth in your body, like your face becomes flush, and I've always kind of theorized that when you are on your deathbed and you are lying there going through like the archives of your entire life, and you have these regrets and stuff like that. I wonder if that feeling is maybe even intensified because you're getting close to the end, and that feeling of warmth would also translate into feeling like fire, and then like over time it just becomes, hell is this place of fire and brimstone. But like we were saying, there's no description of hell has anything in it that isn't something that exists on this planet,
Yeah.
So obviously the concept of hell is something that you create in your mind. So I think that hell exists inside of us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's and in any kind of like the Bible or any other religious kind of text, any religious mythologies out there, there's that internal world gets manifested into a physical place. But in like Event Horizon, it's almost like okay, you guys, like, you think this place really exists? The thing is, it does.
Right.
But it's not what you think it is. It's
Right.
actually this other dimension of just fucking chaos.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then that's what we learn. We find the black box, I'm going to call it, like this DVD, which I think is awesome. It's just basically a DVD.
Right. Yeah.
This is like, I don't know, like actually what, maybe 50 years from now?
Probably even farther, but yeah.
It's like the late, 21st century or whatever.
Right. And they just had that. They have that like interface. It's just a bunch of disk drives.
Yeah, it's like a bunch of disk drives, and like they're like, okay, cool. Here's like the the log, and they pull out this
Laser
DVD
disc,
or
yeah.
whatever laser disc thing. They pop it into their DVD player on the ship, and they start. There's all this like distortion and whatnot, and then what they find though is like the minute that the crew of the Event Horizon is about to go into their hyper black hole drive, and they engage the engine, and then the screen, there's like distortion, and then they filter out what actually happens, and it's like very much like a Clive Barker version of the Inferno. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
This, like wild, like brutality, like blood, sex, like just depravity, basically.
Yeah.
Mutilation.
The worst that you can think of, it's going on right there.
Yeah. Now, you brought up something that you read about how they filmed that. Like you were saying.
Oh yeah. So I was reading that that scene, which unfortunately is cut down like super short, went on for a lot longer, and in order to like really sell it, Paul Anderson had to have like people who would be willing to do something like this, because you're not going to get like these Hollywood actors to do a scene like this. So he hired a bunch of porn stars and amputees, and then just put all the blood and effects all over them like you do anybody else, and then had them just have this crazy blood orgy and just filmed it. And apparently the scene was originally like 10 minutes long, but they cut it down to like only a few seconds, unfortunately. But
Yeah, but it's really effective though too.
yeah, it might be. Maybe it's more effective that it's short that way.
So now we get to learn what the actual statement is. This is where the ship's captain his eyes are ripped out of his head.
He's
and
holding
his fucking eyes, and he's like liberate tutum ex inferas, and it's like Latin for save yourself from hell.
Right.
And I was like, fuck yeah, man, that's sick. Like, why Latin?
Yeah, I don't know. I
know what
guess
I mean?
it's always, it's always the assumption that demons, for whatever reason, either speak Aramaic or Latin for some reason. But that's a man-made concoction. If there's a demon, he probably has a completely different language, right? Like orcs speak, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I just think it's interesting that like this guy's like like a military-esque sort of dude, like a captain or whatever,
right.
who
right.
just is like fascinated with Latin,
Yeah.
But yeah, so now the cat's out of the bag. Everyone's in danger. We're going to hell unless we fucking deal with this thing.
Right.
So that's when Weir starts getting crazy, and that's when he's like, I need to fucking go into oblivion, man, basically, and I don't care about the crew. The hell with the Lewis and Clark.
Right.
Like, I'm on my own path now. You know what I mean? And basically he's going to bring everyone into hell with him, right? So, Miller and Weir have a conflict. Weir gets sucked into outer space, but that's not the last we see of him.
No.
You know, so he comes back as like one of the. Well, I guess I said there's no monster, but I guess in a way, Weir comes back as the monster,
Right.
in some ways.
You missed one good part before this, though.
All right, what was that?
One of your favorite parts is when Miller confronts Weir, and Weir has ripped out his own eyes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And he's like, "Where's your eyes?" And he goes, "We don't need eyes where we're going."
Yeah, that is one of my favorite parts. Yeah, I was remiss in mentioning that part. That's fucking heavy, man. To think
so
about that. You know, it's like it's such a. I mean, the funny thing is, I tried to look up what the writer had done other than this. You know, the hell's the dude's name? Philip Eisner.
Yeah.
He hasn't done much, man. Like from what I can, maybe any of you guys out there, if you know what Philip Eisner's done, if he's written any short stories or novels or anything, like he did a comic, it looks like, but I never even heard of the comic that he did.
Well, I read about this on another website. Because this movie unfortunately didn't do good at the box office, it kind of crippled his career for a long time.
Man.
And which is really fucking sucks considering the knowledge of like that he wrote this movie to like get rid of some personal trauma, and it fucked his actual writing career up.
Wow.
And he didn't get like another writing credit until like the 2000s, like the mid 2000s.
I think the script for this is pretty brilliant, really, man. It's like it's a shame that, you know, it's this movie really was way ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you had mentioned too, like it still looks good. It still holds
Yeah,
up.
it's still, for the most part, it still holds up. Like there's, like the miniatures. I mean, honestly, dude, straight up, like models always look better.
Always.
You know, so the modelry or whatever looks great.
Practical
the miniatures
effects,
look cool.
always.
You know, some of the CGI is a little ropey. You know, I give it, give it that. But like aside from that, it looks great, man. Really. You know, I mean, maybe not in 4K or something like that.
Yeah, maybe not.
Nothing looks good in 4K. Like everything looks like a porn film in 4K, really, like an 80s, like hyper, like detail. You can see every little fucking mole on someone's face.
Every pubic hair.
Yeah, but I think it still looks great, and it's like, it's a bummer because I think that the appetite in the 90s for horror and sci-fi was a little bit more lighthearted. You know, there wasn't like the heaviness. If this movie had come out later, you know, like maybe even 10 years later, like when all those like French films were coming out in the early part of the century, it probably would have been a fucking huge hit, really.
Yeah.
You know?
It could have very well just been, the time that it came out at, and like, because this movie came out like right around the same time as Titanic, so that's more the climate of the the moviegoer, the average moviegoer at that time,
and in genre films, it was like more like ironic horror. Like we were mentioning, Scream and all those films, different, sequels of all those movies where it was like tongue in cheek, and there's nothing really tongue in cheek about this movie. No. It's pretty dead serious,
except for a couple like lines here and there from our one boy.
Yeah. That's cool though, man. I mean,
it fits.
It kind of needed it.
Yeah.
Although I imagine if it didn't have those lines, how fucking heavy this movie would be.
Yeah.
It's
nice that you got a little uplifting, thing once in a while.
Yeah. So, Weir's back. It's very much a Clive Barkian vibe that he has. He's like naked, with scars all over his body, and like maybe sigils and things like that.
This is I was telling you, like, this is one of my favorite looks, like monster, villain, whatever you want to go with, out of any film. Like, I find it's just so well done, and you can tell, like I was saying to you, like you can tell that even like the director really liked this look because he's really up close in Dr. Weir's face after he comes back from hell, and he's got these what we can only assume are like demonic or satanic like sigils carved in his skin, and just random like big gouges through his face and head, and he's like reborn like as a crazy, he's seen hell and come back and he liked it,
Yeah. It's like, once again, like a nod to Hellraiser in some ways. Where
exactly.
It's like, he's like one of these guys who enjoys all that depravity.
Right.
It's like his like I can't wait to go back.
Right.
You know. So the only person really standing between him and just everyone going back to hell with him is Miller, and of course, heroically Miller sacrifices himself. We're giving spoilers here. Just still watch the film, but so he blows up the bridge and the core, and they're incinerated, and then the remaining crew members are in the escape capsule part of the ship, like the bridge, which becomes the escape pod essentially. Now, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I don't believe my feeling is that Weir and Miller actually don't die; they just go to hell.
Yeah.
So that makes Miller's like sacrifice even more intense.
Right, because he's gonna eternal damnation. Yeah. I also question if anybody actually got off of that ship, because there's the dream sequence when they're like in the cryogenic thing, and then they come out of that dream sequence, and then it's the rescue team's there to like help them out and everything like that. But the movie kind of ends, and it never addresses like any other things after the fact. So I wonder if that's just like a loop too, just to fool them to there's movies that have done this before where the guy thinks he's beat it or he's done, but then then jokes on him, he's still in the simulation, or he's still in like the possession or the hellscape or whatever it might be, and there's nothing to prove my theory correct, or but it's just a thought I always had, because I totally agree with your assumption that Weir and Miller, the last, as the event horizon explodes, it takes them into that realm, and I've just sort of extended that theory into like the rest of the crew, like the entire ship, probably, because what we know about black holes, they suck everything into them, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just adding that maybe perhaps the whole ship got sucked into.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, so you think, all right, because the event horizon, like the technical term for that is, there's the black hole is like, infinite mass. So it sucks all matter, light, everything into it. Hence it's black. Okay. You can't perceive anything. The event horizon is the borderland of from which matter can escape or not escape. So if it's like within the event horizon, that's where it gets sucked in. If it's outside of that, then it's like, okay, you're free and clear.
Right.
So you're purporting that the escape ship was also sucked into hell.
Yeah. Well,
I never thought of that.
And if you think about it metaphorically, the ship's called the event horizon. They are within the event horizon.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
And the actual the drive unit is the black hole, right?
Oh,
so the ship is the corona around the black hole.
Okay. All right.
And so they're in between the border and the black hole. So yeah, that's what I purport.
Wow. I never thought of it that way. That's something to consider for sure. But definitely Weir and Miller. Like Weir gets to go where he wants to go.
Right.
But he's bummed out that he didn't get to. His thoughts are he didn't get to suck the rest of the reality in there with him.
Sure.
And Miller is like fucking let's roll, and he just fucking jumps into hell with him.
Right.
Which I think is so incredibly heroic, man.
Yeah,
it
that's
was awesome.
That's like falling on your sword, kind of.
Yeah. It was badass. So great movie, man. Like one of my favorites, man, of all time. And we were talking about the missing footage. So last year, I think it was last year, within the last couple of years, Arrow put out another extended Blu-ray of this, which I picked up. Now, I love the Blu-ray that I have. However, I feel a little gypped, a little hoodwinked by these guys.
You were telling me, yeah.
They made it seem like they were going to have this extra footage. Now, this footage exists.
It does.
And I want to fucking see it, man. You know what I mean? I want to see what this extra 10 minutes is.
Right.
And they were kind of teasing that it was part of this cut, and it wasn't. So, I mean, it's a beautiful Blu-ray, but I feel a little let down that it's not part of it.
Yeah, that's kind of shitty.
Yeah. But, whatever. It's out there. Any of you guys out there who have not seen this film, if you're following this Patreon, thing that we're doing, you're on the same page as us. Something you got to see. I know some of you have seen it already because in the past we've talked about this movie, but definitely go check this out. Let me ask you a question. Do you think this should be remade?
No.
I agree with you. People have asked me that same question on the Necromaniacs stream. Like, oh, this would be a perfect movie to be remade. I was like, well, who the fuck's going to play these characters and who's going to write the script?
I mean, first and foremost, I cannot see anybody other than Sam Neill playing this Dr. Weir character. And also, you know, the trend nowadays, especially in sci-fi movies, is to do everything with CGI.
Yes.
And I really dislike CGI. Even though it's really good nowadays, is that, you know, it's harder to tell than it used to be. It just sort of kind of breaks the immersion for me. I like when people actually have to be in an actual set and act within an actual set.
Definitely.
You know, I mean, like the astronaut suits that these guys wear in this movie were so heavy. I was reading this, that they were so heavy. They like weighed something around like 100 pounds a piece, right? That they had these like cables with hooks on them that they could hook the people's in their shoulders to, so that when they weren't filming, they could get a little bit of relief.
Right.
Because the suits were too complex to take off and on in between filming, so they just had to keep these suits on. But that, like, just something alone like that's going to make people a little irritable when they're filming, and then that little irritability is going to come through in the acting. And that's why I think it's important to do movies with practical effects. And just, yeah, I think this movie's fine the way it is. Fucking stop remaking movies. Leave everything the way. Leave it alone. Especially this movie. Leave this fucking movie alone.
Yeah, everything has like weight, like with the practical effects. You know what I mean? And the only thing that, like, I'm just gonna like say this. Like, I don't think the film should be remade. But you know how like you know, they made a TV series out of Let the Right One In. Now originally I was like, fuck that. Like, what kind of story are you gonna tell? Mm-hmm. But what they actually did was pretty cool. It was like the very, very, the concept of it. And they just came up with their own thing. Yeah. Their own storyline. It doesn't even take place in Sweden. It takes place in New York. Okay. You know, it's like the only thing that's similar to the original idea was that there's a young girl. That's it. And then she's a vampire. Everything else is like completely original and new. And, you know, even the nature of vampirism in that show is like related to like a medical thing. It's not even like, you know, an ambiguous like curse or whatever. That's the only way Event Horizon could be remade, is like if you gave it to like a guys like Benson and Moorhead or something like that and say, Harry, here's Event Horizon, do your riff on this. Right. You know, like a Black Hole Drive and Hell. Sure. Go with it.
Yeah, if it was somehow like it was related in spirit, but not like a cut by cut remake of the film.
Yeah, totally.
Then I think it would have potential. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to see someone else like come up with their own story based on just, all right, we have a warp drive with a black hole, and there has to be hell involved.
Sure. I mean, a very easy way to do something like that too would just be like, you know, they stumbled across Dr. Weir's like work, and then someone tries to recreate his work.
Now you're talking.
Right.
Yeah. They find his journals. Right. You know, and they refer to Dr. Weir like, oh, you know, he went missing. Because no one would, well, all right, with your theory.
No one would know.
No one would know.
Right.
Like we would have like, you know, the crew members are also in hell. Right. And then there would be another disappearance. Right. And then like someone would find his calculations and his notebooks and all this stuff. And they were like, oh, you know, like, you know, maybe even like some renegade guy, like who's not part of the establishment. It's like, I'm going to try to reproduce this. Right. Know? And then he designs another ship, and then that's where the story starts.
Right. And you know, when Dr. Weir invented this thing, he had no, like, at least as far as we know, he had no knowledge that it was going to, like, open up a portal to hell. So anybody who would find said work would also not know that it would potentially open a portal to hell. And you could have this reoccurrence that way, where
or it could be just like whatever happened to Dr. Weir. I want to find, like, I want to, you know,
or that too,
like he's, you know, people would celebrate him as some kind of genius, but there'd be mysteries about his disappearance and all that.
And then you could have a Weir character who's not played by Sam Neill if, say, they ventured into hell and find him in hell. Yeah, like he becomes like, maybe he's like hell's ambassador or some shit like that because he's been there so long, you know, like. So I'm not against that at all. I think that would be interesting for sure. But yeah, I would like them not to like do what they did to like My Precious The Thing.
Yeah. So there you go. Someone write it up and let us know.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
you got the idea from us, so we'll get a cut.
Yeah,
on
give
this.
us credit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Evan, thanks, man. This is great.
Absolutely.
And we got to do more of these in person, man. That'd be cool.
Yeah, hell yeah. This is really fun. I enjoy
Yeah.
this.
Well, my house is your house, and
I really appreciate it, man. Thank you.
once again, everyone, thanks for supporting the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.